It's hard to believe that the last time we saw a Batman animated show was 10 years ago, after Beware the Batman aired its last episode back in 2014, but recently, this year, we finally saw the release of Batman Caped Crusader, a show that's been highly anticipated ever since it was announced in 2021. Many people were immediately excited upon hearing that we would finally see an adult-oriented Batman animated show. It's something that I've personally been dreaming about ever since I was a kid, and I honestly always found it kinda weird that DC has made so many successful mature Batman animated movies, but they took so long in creating an adult Batman cartoon series. That was already an exciting concept, but the fact that Caped Crusader was being worked on by such an incredible lineup of creative people made fans even more hyped about this series, with producers like Matt Reeves, who directed The Batman, and incredible comic book writers like Greg Rucka and Ed Brubaker also working on this series. And, of course, many were excited that Bruce Timm would also be working on this show, and that it would be taking some light visual and artistic inspiration from the classic Batman the Animated Series. So while Caped Crusader isn't a full-on revival, it is in a way a spiritual successor to BTAS, and its sensibilities look through a darker and more mature perspective. Having BTAS as a source of inspiration made a lot of fans immediately hyped for Caped Crusader right away, but personally, I was more excited about the show's other main source of inspiration, that being the fact that Caped Crusader takes direct inspiration from the golden age of comics, something that very few other Batman projects have done throughout the years. So while Caped Crusader isn't really a revival of BTAS, it is a revival of the golden age of Batman. Every Batman story always takes inspiration from many different sources, including previous Batman storylines and different periods of the character's history, in order to create a new perspective on his world by incorporating different elements from his mythos. But some Batman projects end up mainly adapting elements from one specific source. Batman the Animated Series, for example, was an amalgam of many different comic book elements, but it mainly took inspiration from the Bronze Age of Batman comics, with many of the series' episodes being adaptations of stories from that era, taken from runs by Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil, Steve Englehart, and more. Batman the Brave and the Bold, while it also took inspiration and made reference to many different periods from DC Comics, it mainly adapted elements from the Silver Age. And now Caped Crusader is the first series to mainly take inspiration from the Golden Age, those being the character stories published between 1939 until 1954. The Golden Age of Batman has never been adapted that much outside of comics. While Superman's Golden Age was immortalized by the Fleischer shorts back in the 1940s, Batman didn't get the same treatment. Although interestingly enough, they did try. In the book The Boy Who Loved Batman, written by Michael Uslan, who was an executive producer of 1989's Batman and crucial to getting the movie made, he detailed the time that he worked for DC in the 1970s, and in their offices, he found an old letter from Fleischer Studios, written in 1942, and directed towards National Comics discussing about the potential budget that would cost to make some theatrical shorts based on the classic Batman comics, just like they had done for Superman. Although people aren't sure if they were considering making animated shorts like Superman or live-action ones, but those plans never happened in the end. And ultimately, the only time that the Golden Age period of Batman was ever really adapted was during the film serials produced by Columbia Pictures in 1943 and later in 1949, which showed us the first live-action Batman. Caped Crusader, however, heavily takes inspiration from Batman's early Golden Age period, from its visual designs like the use of the first Clayface, or Batman's suit with his really pointy ears, and his gloves, which should be purple, but whatever, to specific Easter eggs like the police sketches of Batman being inspired by Golden Age drawings from different panels and comic covers. And Julie Madison, who was Batman's most recurring girlfriend throughout his first stories, was also featured, and I honestly wish she was used more and would have loved if they adapted some storylines she appeared in, like Batman and the Monster Man or the Mad Monk. Batman using a gun momentarily is a reference to how he frequently used guns in his very early stories, and its tone and themes were also aligned more with the Golden Age, given that early superhero stories were a bit darker at first, and directly addressed mature themes like death, corruption, poverty, and more. much like pulp magazines. There wasn't that much regulation about what comics could and couldn't depict, since the Comics Code Authority didn't exist until decades later, being implemented in 1954 after the American public grew some animosity towards the comic book medium, after books like Seduction of the Innocent convinced the general public that comic books were corrupting children's minds. But in the 1930s and 40s, that hadn't happened yet, so early Batman stories heavily featured topics like death and corruption, which is something that Caped Crusader heavily focuses on as well. This show's connection with the Golden Age was present even before its conception. Before the series, there was an animated short that Bruce Timm directed for Batman's 75th anniversary back in 2014 titled Strange Days, which featured a Golden Age Batman fighting against Hugo Strange and his Monster Men, an iconic storyline from that time period. It's a really good short that served as a proof of concept for what an adult-oriented Batman series set in the 1940s could look like, and I'm sure that it gave DC the confidence in materializing the concept, even if they almost cancelled the show until it was picked up by Amazon. But let's ignore that. While the series does lean into the more darker and serious elements from its Golden Age and pulp sensibilities, it's also cool how they still included some campier or more outlandish comic book elements like Catwoman having a Catmobile, or the Penguin having a cannon on the roof of her boat as an umbrella. That sort of stuff alongside its occasional humor served to balance the show a bit and give it some levity. As we've previously mentioned, besides the Golden Age, Caped Crusader's other biggest source of influence clearly comes from Batman the Animated Series. Given that the show is even being worked on by Bruce Timm and his designs and visual aesthetics carry over from his previous DCAU work. Honestly, while I respect and love shows like X-Men 97 for reviving an old series while continuing its storyline in a modernized and exciting new way, I also love that Caped Crusader still carries on BTAS's legacy, while technically not being a full-on revival, working more as a spiritual successor to BTAS, since it establishes itself as its own interpretation and world, but it still pays clear homage to the animated series and the DCAU. They even managed to revive the old Nocturna episode idea from BTAS in this show, since the concept was rejected back then because an episode about vampires was considered to be too dark for young audiences. It's not really completely fair to directly compare BTAS and Caped Crusader in terms of quality, since there are two shows made for two different audiences and age demographics that are trying to achieve different things. And in principle, all works of art should be analyzed individually and stand on their own merits. That's why I don't really think we should focus too much on if Caped Crusader is better or worse than BTAS, or if it could potentially surpass it in the future with more seasons. What I will say is that Caped Crusader has the chance of exploring the Batman mythos' more mature themes that simply wasn't possible in a cartoon aimed at younger audiences. The main theme of this season is Gotham's corruption, and how people in positions of power abuse the systems placed to theoretically help the citizens of the city, while in reality its entire society is directed by flawed systems that have been corrupted and compromised, leaving its city in a constant state of decay and societal neglect. This season focuses on the corruption inside Gotham's police, political and judicial systems, and the downfall of those who abuse those systems as its overarching storyline. The show did a great job in properly depicting Gotham as being in a state of social and economical decline, with high inflation and unemployment rates, a surge in violent crime related to the gang war, and the appearance of costume outlaws similar to the Batman. This direct exploration of a mature subject matter such as corruption strikes in contrast to Batman the Animated Series. That show could only merely allude to Gotham's corruption, since network guidelines for children's television dictated that the police and authority figures couldn't be shown as being actual bad guys. So we mostly couldn't see real corruption on BTAS, even though it was part of the show's lore. In the series Bible created for the show's conception, it referenced that James Gordon was appointed as commissioner by the corrupt former mayor of Gotham, who wanted to use Gordon as his man inside the GCPD, and its description of Gotham explicitly mentions its deep political corruption. But in the show itself, they can never fully tackle the deep effects that corruption has on Gotham beyond some mere allusions to it, like in the episode POV, where after a crime bust goes wrong and $2 million go missing, Harvey Bullock, Renee Montoya, and a rookie police officer all get interrogated about what went wrong. and they were even accused of being on the take, meaning that they were being accused of accepting bribes from criminal organizations, but that was as far as its allusions to corruption could go. I've always respected BTAS for being able to work around the limitations of children's TV by having to be more creative and subtle in how they discuss mature subject matters. But I believe that if you tackle a subject in a more direct manner, it can portray a more complete perspective on the matter and allow for more story possibilities. And this is why Caped Crusader, by being able to fully explore the theme of corruption head-on, gives the audience a more nuanced and complex view on how the world of Batman works, and why a place like Gotham City absolutely needed a being like Batman to exist in order to disrupt its status quo and eventually get better. It's one of the reasons why Caped Crusader fully takes advantage of having a mature rating. It's not being dark for the sake of it being able to fully explore mature themes like corruption and death adds more substance to its story, since it gives a more complete and nuanced perspective on why Gotham is the way that it is, and how corruption can spread in such an unjust system run by deeply flawed and morally bankrupt people. By showing just how corrupt Gotham is and how horrible it has become directly because of it, demonstrates why a being like Batman needed to exist. Gotham was already a horrible city long before Bruce Wayne became the Batman. Gotham City absolutely needed the Batman, and you can't truly convey that without directly tackling the subject of corruption. One specific instance in which the show perfectly depicted how corruption spreads in a neglected city happened during the 4th episode of the season. And there, they show that detectives Arnold Flass and Harvey Bullock come up with a plan to lure out the Batman in order to capture him, since Gotham's mayor is pressuring the GCPD to stop him. And so Flass and Bullock purposefully release a psychopathic murderous arsonist who uses the supervillain identity of Firebug, and they release him on purpose, and of course Firebug ends up setting some buildings on fire, putting people's lives in danger. Later on, once Firebug surrenders to the police, Flass and Bullock realize that he would eventually rat them out, and say that they released him from prison on purpose. Because of this, they kill Firebug, so he wouldn't talk about their plot and expose them.
He'll talk about his escape.
What's truly compelling about all this, and how it relates to real-life cases of corruption in a powerful way, is that after Flass and Bullock publicly killed Firebug in front of multiple witnesses, and even though they are berated by Commissioner Gordon because he knows that Flass and Bullock purposefully put people's lives in danger, in the end, they were rewarded for their corruption by Gotham's crooked mayor, and he gave them promotions, all thanks to their corrupt actions. This truly shows in an authentic way how injustice spreads so easily inside a system that's inherently rotten to its core, and that's been completely ethically compromised. This is how people who are awful at their jobs get ahead in their careers despite being dangerously incompetent and unfit to hold their positions. I've mentioned this in previous videos, but I'm actually from and I'm currently living in Latin America. And if you're from here or are minimally informed about what goes on in the continent, then you know the entire region has had multiple documented cases and publicized scandals about police corruption stories. It's been going on for years throughout multiple governments of multiple countries, and yeah, it's true that corruption exists in basically all types of organizations, but Latin America is insane. We have some of the highest rates of corruption worldwide. I just mentioned this because I love to pay respect to works of art that directly comment on real-world issues in an authentic and genuine way. Corruption exists in real life because corrupt people often get rewarded for their corruption. This is a systemic issue that perpetuates and spreads the abuse of power. Episode 3 is another story that showcases how a flawed, compromised legal system can spread corruption. Specifically when Bruce Wayne is talking with Harley Quinn in therapy, and he says that life is different for wealthy people like him.
Life is just different for people in my position.
Someone wealthy, you mean? I'm sure it is.
Right after that scene, they contrast what Bruce said with how Selina Kyle didn't get any sentence after robbing a jewelry store and being able to walk away completely free despite having previous offenses from other crimes, showing how people who are born into wealth and a more privileged socioeconomic background can often abuse and take advantage of flawed, corrupt systems thanks to their money.
So when it's my clients, you're gunning for jail time. But when it's the rich and famous, they get a break? What is she, Harvey? A campaign donor?
I really respect how this series depicted multiple perspectives and points of view from characters that come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. Episode 7 perfectly highlights this when Montoya has a brief confrontation with Barbara Gordon that shows the animosity, tension, and detachment that people with different backgrounds have in Gotham's current state. With Montoya criticizing the rich and well-off people for leaving Gotham to live in separated areas so they can ignore the city's problems, while maintaining a system that will never allow for real change or social mobility.
Typical. Richies can't stomach the real Gotham, so they just leave instead of making the city better. Go to the suburbs, where it looks nice.
That's a little one-sided. We were just across the river. We didn't leave.
I also loved an opening monologue that a police officer has in the beginning of episode 6, where she also addresses the corruption and societal decay of Gotham when the cops are patrolling an old abandoned area of the city that used to have working factories and used to be an area of economic activity, but that's now all abandoned due to lack of city investment and funding. And so a once productive area of the city was neglected and left to decay. This season did a great job in showing how corruption is facilitated and emboldened by people with selfish goals who abuse and manipulate systems in order to get what they want, to the detriment of regular people, like Mayor Jessup rewarding Bullock and Flash for killing a man as a cover-up just because it makes the police and the current administration seen as tough on crime. Or how Harvey Dent succumbs to his corrupt nature and starts making deals with mob boss Rupert Thorne once he starts losing popularity and gets behind Jessup on the polls. It's also great how they took the time to establish and properly develop Batman's cast of supporting characters, from Lucius Fox, Alfred Pennyworth, and especially the entire GCPD, since they were very relevant to the main narrative, showing how corruption can affect Gotham's institutions. It makes stuff like Jim Corrigan's betrayal more effective, since they took the time to introduce him episodes earlier and establish him as a seemingly honest cop. And I also thought their interpretations of Barbara and Commissioner Gordon had good characterizations. It's nice that episode 4 showed the moment that Gordon realized that Batman is a good person who is honestly trying to help Gotham's people when he sees him rescuing some kids from a burning building. All of this great character work done for the GCPD characters was in part probably thanks to the contributions of Ed Brubaker and Greg Rucka, two fantastic comic book writers who helped in making Caped Crusader, and they were also responsible for a great comic book run titled Gotham Central, which focused on crime in Gotham City from the perspective of the GCPD. All of this shows that the staff behind this series really cared about fleshing out its entire world as well as its main character. Speaking of Batman, I really enjoyed his depiction in this world. He's truly menacing, aggressive, cold, and emotionally distant, almost to the point of being a sociopath. His voice actor, Hamish Linklater, did a great job in portraying both sides of the character. His playboy persona felt like he was completely detached from all other human beings. He doesn't have real conversations with people, nor does he truly want to connect on any level with anyone. He maintains a wall and a facade at all times. His demeanor in general feels more repressed and alienated than in most adaptations, like in episode 5 when Wilma, an old acquaintance of his family, tries to give her condolences to Bruce for the loss of his parents, to try to empathize with him, and he responded without any emotion. Or when Harley Quinn tried to get Bruce to talk about his parents, and he immediately rejected the topic of conversation. These instances show just how extremely repressed he is. Even in moments where Bruce tries to be empathetic or nice with other people, aren't completely genuine most times. Although an instance like Bruce trying to reach out to Harvey after he got acid thrown on his face may seem like a sign of compassion and kindness in Bruce's character, it was also a cold, manipulative, and calculating means of trying to get more information on what Harvey got into. Alfred himself described it as a tactic that Bruce was using to get information out of someone who is supposedly his friend. Despite Bruce being obviously emotionally stunted, he is still a genuinely caring and compassionate person, like the ending of episode 8 shows, where Batman saves Nocturna's life, or when he humbles himself to Alfred after he almost died fighting against the Gentleman Ghost, where Bruce admits that he couldn't be Batman without Alfred's help. And these moments show that Batman is genuinely a caring person, but he has trouble with expressing his emotions. It's also interesting to see a new dynamic between Batman and Alfred. His relationship, or lack thereof, with Alfred truly shows the lack of humanity of this Batman. At first I thought that, since they used the Fat Alfred design from the Golden Age, I thought that maybe they were gonna adapt Alfred Beagley, the original incarnation of the character, who didn't raise Bruce as a child, and didn't have that much of a personal relationship with him. But no, in Caped Crusader, he is still Alfred Pennyworth, and he still took care of Bruce as a child after the death of his parents. But Bruce never opened himself up emotionally to Alfred, and they never had a good relationship due to how cold Bruce became. They don't have a father-son type relationship like in the comics and most other forms of media. Alfred still cares for Bruce and tries to sympathize with him, but Bruce is extra cold and distant in this version of him. He bosses Alfred around, even as a kid when he demanded Alfred that he was going to help him on his insane mission.
They're going to pay.
They?
All of them. I'm going to make them pay. And you're going to help me.
In most other interpretations, Alfred and Bruce have a strong bond and a warm relationship beyond their professional one, and they banter, joke around with each other, and have meaningful conversations where they show empathy for one another. But Bruce really is much colder in this world. Lucius even takes a dig at Bruce for treating Alfred like shit in episode 5.
I'm not sure which is stranger. Pennyworth believing in ghosts, or that you two are so chummy.
Well, I was raised to treat the staff like people, Bruce. You might want to give it a try sometime.
While I truly commend them for giving Batman a character arc that relates to his mental health, it also felt underdeveloped in my opinion. When you compare Bruce's and Alfred's relationship in this show and in 2022's The Batman, we can see how they could have conveyed Bruce's character development from being emotionally distant to eventually growing closer to Alfred in a more engaging and believable way. Since we can see how Bruce went from having grudges and misplaced anger towards Alfred after he believes that he was holding a secret from him about his parents. But after a bomb exploded and Alfred got hurt, we can also see how worried he got about Alfred's life, by seeing how Bruce felt conflicted about Alfred and how they managed to resolve their grievances by truly connecting with each other. After Alfred clears up the secrets he found out about his parents, Bruce realizing that he loves and cares for Alfred makes him connect more with his humanity, and we as an audience can truly feel that. But in the case of Caped Crusader, Bruce calling Alfred by his first name in the season finale instead of Pennyworth just doesn't have the same emotional resonance and felt underdeveloped. It leaves you wishing that Bruce and Alfred could have had more character moments or dialogue scenes and allowed Bruce to open up in a more genuine way. So while I enjoyed both of these new versions of Bruce and Alfred, I think their relationship should have been developed more for it to truly convey how Batman needs to get more in touch with his humanity and compassion, and it's an area where I think the show can improve moving forward. Alfred even points out to Batman that he's in danger of losing his humanity if he doesn't check himself on his mission, much like how Two-Face ruined his life because he lost touch with his humanity, caved into his worst character traits, and allowed himself to be corrupted by Gotham. He even confronted Bruce about manipulating Harvey into going out in public, which caused him to have a psychotic breakdown, and making Bruce see that his cold, calculating decisions made him partly responsible for the damage caused by Two-Face, and made him realize that he needs to empathize and humanize himself more. In future seasons, I wish that this show continues to develop Batman's humanity and showcase more of his compassion, because this incarnation is at a point in the character's life where he's the most antisocial and mentally unstable. Having this version of Batman be such an asshole to the man that essentially raised him since he was a kid, it makes it a bit harder for us as an audience to empathize with him, so I hope they do continue to develop his humanity in a compelling way. I mostly really enjoyed the show and thought it was great, but besides Bruce and Alfred's relationship feeling a bit underdeveloped, there's a few other criticisms that I have, mostly regarding certain interpretations of specific characters. While I liked most of the villains used in this season, and thought that Two-Face in particular was well developed, I didn't fully like these versions of Harley Quinn and Onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia honestly felt pretty silly, and there's always been concern about adapting the character outside of comics. Even the character's creator, Kevin Smith, has admitted that he doesn't think the character really works outside of comics, which is why he was never adapted onto Arrow, despite being one of Green Arrow's most recognizable villains among comic fans. I still overall enjoyed his episode, and it's not like the character felt completely out of place with some of the other campier elements they showed, but it's just that him speaking in onomatopoeias isn't nearly as scary or intimidating in execution as the comics may show it. I do think that onomatopoeia could work outside the comics, but he would have to be reworked into being more scary and intimidating in my opinion. I also feel a bit conflicted about Harley Quinn's new interpretation. Introducing her as Bruce's psychologist was a fun idea. The character was portrayed as being pretty intelligent, and I like that they gave her personal relationships with Barbara and Renee Montoya. I really like whenever they introduce Harley Quinn as a character independent from the Joker, who turned out to be evil even if she didn't met the Joker in that universe. Like in the World of Gods and Monsters, which depicted her as a crazy serial killer. This show, however, depicted her as kind of a jigsaw torturer type, which I kind of liked. I also liked her costume design and how she spoke when she was being a villain. Her motivation to turn into a villain, showing her as getting sick of hearing her patients' traumas and hypocrisy, was also understandable. But I think that the idea mostly failed in execution. Having her literally brainwash her patients without much explanation felt a little too ridiculous. Same with the costumes that she forced them to wear. It would have felt easier to accept her scheme if she simply tortured her victims and coerced them into unwillingly doing what she wanted, rather than her literally brainwashing them by tickling their feet. I just thought that it could have been executed better, but beyond that, I honestly don't have that many criticisms for the show. Even if I had a few minor gripes about some of the villains, overall I thought they were great. I especially loved how they showed Harvey Dent's gradual downfall into Two-Face. I also loved that they showed Two-Face trying to do justice in a perverted way, in a scene where he saved a man from being robbed and harmed. It's an aspect of the character that kinda goes underutilized in a lot of his adaptations. I think that the show has room to grow, but it's already a really strong start, and I think that the show made an overall great first impression. I love its art style and really like the posing, angles, and compositions of some of the shots. Its visuals are great, and its 1940s period setting feels even more prevalent than in BTAS. I love its somber color palette and melancholic tone, and the DCAU-like Art Deco look was also greatly executed. I also thought its action scenes, for the most part, were very entertaining.
Tell me everything. Now.
The action is pretty good. I liked how they gave variety in the enemies that they chose for Batman to fight. Like how Clayface's fight has a more horror feel to it since he's a serial killer, or how Gentleman Ghost uses magic to fight. I also really liked how dark the show could get. This show has some truly horrifying moments, like showing a man being burned alive, Nocturna draining life force from kids, and Gentleman Ghost dying, or Two-Face having a meltdown in a restaurant.
What do you think, sweetheart? Do I look okay? No? Then go on. Say it. Say it!
Harvey!
It was also really cool seeing certain characters from the comics get briefly introduced to expand the show's world, like most of Batman's Robins being introduced as orphans in Leslie Tompkins' orphanage, and Deadshot also had a cameo, so did Plastic Man as a photographer. Jim Corrigan appeared, and I honestly hope he returns as the Spectre. Scarecrow was mentioned by Harley Quinn, and I really liked how Killer Croc punched Bruce Wayne because he actually thought he was a PDF file.
Have you seen two girls around here? One has a blonde ponytail, the other...
Why are you looking for two little girls?
Damn creep.
Why were you looking for some kids, Bruce? What? Caped Crusader has the potential of being one of the best adaptations of Batman we've ever seen. If we're being honest, I think that almost all Batman fans have always dreamed for a dark, adult-oriented Batman show, and in that regard, this show wasn't disappointing at all in my opinion, and it has a lot of story possibilities moving forward. The Joker will be introduced in Season 2, and it seems like they'll take inspiration from his Golden Age iteration based on the main character from the 1928 film, The Man Who Laughs. I also hope they continue developing Batman's character and humanity in more detail. I personally would like for them to give Bruce a meaningful relationship that allows him to truly emotionally connect with someone. Since for now it doesn't seem like this show will introduce a Robin as a sidekick for Bruce anytime soon, I believe it would be interesting if they chose to give Bruce a well thought out and developed relationship. Maybe they could keep using Julie Madison, since she was the most reoccurring love interest in Batman comics throughout the Golden Age, and they could adapt this storyline where the Mad Monk kidnaps her, which is a personal favorite comic of mine. It doesn't necessarily need to be Julie Madison though, it could be Silver St. Cloud, Selena Kyle, or Andrea Beaumont. But I honestly think that the best way to give Batman some humanity is to show him actually caring and loving someone else in a meaningful way. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the first season of Batman Caped Crusader. But what did you think about it? What was your favorite episode? What did you think of its reinventions and reinterpretations of different characters? What villains and storylines would you like to see explored in future seasons? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below, cause I'm really interested in hearing other people's opinions on the show. And if you watched the video till this point, I really appreciate it. You guys are awesome. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Till next time.